All right, we are live. I'm excited. I am Dr. Sheldon L. Akins, host of the Leading Equity podcast, also founder of the Leading Equity Center. I'm excited for today. We're kicking off the Art of Advocacy live stream. So we're going to stream on Thursdays every week. And normally we're going to be at 6:30 Eastern. Today we have a special time. But from now on, we'll be going from 6:30 for about an hour or so for my East Coast folks. So what's that? 3:30 Pacific time. But I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. And listen, we got a really important topic to talk about today, and just in regards to educating our Black boys. And this is something I'm very passionate about, and our special guest is very passionate about as well. So I'm going to read Dr. Daryl Howard's bio real quick, and then I'll bring them on, and then we'll chop it up, and then make sure you hang on. If you have questions, I want you to write those questions down. Feel free to put in your comments as well. So the comments is live. Matter of fact, I want to know who's out there. So if you tell me, say hello, where you're from. If you're an educator, let us know who's out there. It'd be nice to see who's logged in and streaming with us live right now. So yeah, say hello. While we're doing that, again, Dr. Daryl Howard is an equity instructional specialist whose work and research interests include race and cultural proficiency, social emotional learning, and the triumphs and challenges of African American male students. As chair of Maryland State Department of Education's Advisory Council on Equity and Excellence for Black Boys, he researches and recommends policy and practice to disrupt harmful narratives, decrease disproportionality, and elevate achievement. Howard also leads the Bond Learning Leadership Institute for Boys and is the author of Complex People: Insights at the Intersection of Black Culture and American Social Life. So, in just a moment, I got someone from, is it Tamara? I hope I say it correctly, from Beaverton, Oregon, mother of seventh grader. Nice, nice, nice. And then we have Kim is here from Concord, California, and yes, a coalition member. Good to see you, Kim. Thanks for hanging out with us today. So, anybody else out there, just go ahead and say hello. Tell us where you're from. If you're an educator, great. Let us know as well. I'm going to bring on Dr. Howard. So, let's see if I can add him to stream. There he is. So, Dr. Howard, how are you doing today?
What's up, Sheldon Akins? Man, it's a pleasure to be with you. Always a good time. I'm happy that we could catch up, man. So appreciate being on the show.
Pleasure is mine. I see some other folks coming in. Kim is here. Good to see you, Kim Walters from Wisconsin. We got Henry Gilmore from Cleveland County Schools, Director of Community and Family Engagement. All right, welcome,
Mm.
welcome. Maria's here. See, I'm a second grade teacher from Ontario, Canada. Nice. So it's great, great, great. So, Daryl, is it okay if I call you Daryl, or do you prefer Dr. Howard?
Absolutely,
Okay.
Daryl's fine.
All right. So yeah, I read your official bio, the one that we give out for those presentations and conferences and all that jazz. But
Right.
I want to know if you could share a little bit about yourself, like who is Daryl outside of the bio part?
Wow. Okay. So who is there outside the bio part? So originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, um, the area around surrounding Philly. Moved to Maryland when I was about 23 ish. Been down here half of my life. Made it my home. Um, Husband of 20 plus years. And most importantly, I think in terms of who I am, who where my identity is rooted and sits, is I'm a father of three daughters.
Wow.
Yeah, three daughters. It's yes, and so that informs a lot of how I think about the world. I was a sociology major in undergrad. Became a school counselor when I started off in education. Taught sociology minorities. Always had a focus on race and gender equity, and I thought I knew a lot. But then I had a daughter.
Mm,
Then I had the second one. Then I
mm.
had the third one. and so I'm just growing. I'm just thinking. I'm being pushed. Um, and so it's been a great experience for me as a man to be able to recognize how I walk through the world and how they are walking through the world, and trying to give them a sense of the voice that they need to have to be the people that they desire to be when they grow up. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a great thing for me and hopefully for them.
First of all, kudos to you for having 3 daughters. I got 1 and I'm struggling with the 1. And so just having 3, I can't even imagine what that must be like, but hey, I'm sure you're holding it down. So that's good and I'm glad that you're a part of that. Now, I want to talk about, imagine a school where every black boy was doing well and the reason why I want to talk about this is because you were a presenter at our Leading Equities virtual summit a couple years ago, and this was a topic. And when I was watching your video, I was like, man, the stuff that you were saying in the video, I thought was really important. So I would love for you to kind of start off by maybe talking about, well, why is this topic even in, why are we even having this conversation in the first place?
Right. So um, I'm trying to think where to start. Should I start with the video or should I start with some things that have happened since the video?
What made
Um,
you okay? Well, let's start with what made you put the video. Like, why did you do the video in the first place? And then we can
okay,
talk
so
about post video.
right. So when you put that call out, I don't know if you remember about the art of advocacy, and you and I shared maybe 5 to 10 emails about what exactly are you aiming for? Who's the audience? What are they supposed to hear and take away? Um, and so I started thinking about what are 3 key things that educators in any individual who works with young men really needs to think about as they're working with them. What are their experiences? How do they engage learning? How do you best connect with them? And so I came up with the 3 principles that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a moment. But then after presenting that piece, I then was approached by the National Association of Elementary School Principals. They said, we want you to put something together, 600 words, make sure it's nice and concise. And with those 3 principles, I was able to tell a really quick story about the best ways that schools need to continuously be thinking through how you engage this particular demographic. And so, yeah, the 3 elements hit on some specific points, and I'm happy to share those points.
Yeah,
The
we'll break it.
title,
We'll break
yeah,
those down. We'll break those down.
yeah,
So now, did you want to jump into the post video, like because you said that there was something that happened afterwards?
yeah. So after after the video, and then after the article was written, I said I need to create more of this. People were asking for more, and so I've created an entire. I mean, I could span it from anywhere from 2 hours to 8 hours in
Wow.
terms of professional learning around Black boys. And I call it reaching and teaching Black boys. And in fact, this past weekend, I just did a webinar, 3 hours from 9 to 12. I made it free and open to the general public because I've been doing it with some school systems and testing it out, and folks have been really receptive. So I wanted to make sure that more people were able to engage the content and the learning. And folks came on a Saturday morning. I mean, and they
Yeah.
hung in there until 12:04, and I'm like, we gotta go. We gotta wrap this up. So it was a good day, and so those webinars have started. That professional development has started, but also I took on a role with the Maryland State Department of Education as the chair of a new initiative that they have called Achieving Academic Equity and Excellence for Black Boys. And so I can go into detail about that now, or we can save that. But that's one of the things that I'm happy to be. I'm happy to be leading some of the work that will be taking place across the state for our boys.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us more about the program.
Yeah. So um, I was part of the task force that came together. There was a call for individuals who had an interest in this particular area of work to do some research around what are the best practices, what are the best strategies, what are the best policies that we need to be looking at, from individuals that were having some success with their African American male students. And so, after a year of research with K-12 educators, college professors, nonprofit folks, past clergy, um, we put together a manual, and you can find it on the Maryland State Department of Education's website. And it's about 100 and something pages, and it has a number of different recommendations in it that speak to things that should be happening in schools that would elevate the achievement of Black boys. And I think the specific title on it is like transforming the culture of Maryland schools for Black boys. So the three areas are like, it looks at social emotional learning, it looks at aiming to increase the recruitment and retention of male educators in the field. And the last piece is like curriculum instruction, so like professional development around equity, culturally responsive practices. How are you how are you exploring the curriculum in new ways and bringing in new information and being able to tell a number of different stories that would include the voices of those who are oftentimes marginalized. So, pretty proud of that publication that we were able to put together. And now we have schools across the state of Maryland who are implementing these recommendations. And of course, over the next 1, 2, and the third year, we will be seeing, like, we want some proof of concept that if you do this in your school, this is where you will see some results. So that's kind of where we are, and I'm just happy to be a part of that project. Um, when you think about things that you're happy to be associated with, that
Yeah.
you know could be life changing, like, I think this is one of them. So I'm
This is
pretty
that one.
happy about that. Pretty happy about that for sure.
Nice. Well, congratulations. I mean, just the waves that you're making in Maryland sounds amazing. Let's jump into the topic. And by the way, folks, if you're joining us, feel free to shout out where you're from. And then get your questions ready too as we talk. If you have some questions that come up or any comments, just put those in as well, and we'll try to address them. And we'll definitely leave some time towards the end as well that we'll dedicate to some Q&A. So you list three different things that we can do to, like, primarily support our Black boys. And let's start with the first one. Could you share that with us?
Yeah. So, um, when I was fine tuning how this piece would this presentation and then this written piece would come out, I had to start at the very beginning. I had to start helping individuals to reflect on themselves. So the principle number one is learn about your biases, and then once you learn about your biases, you will think differently. So, kind of like the thinking behind that is, we were to go back in from a historical perspective, like, even like I like during the webinar, I talk about, like, during 1947, there was the infamous doll test where they had children who were asked to choose the dolls. There were a number of dolls laid out in front of them, the dolls that were the friendly dolls, the smart dolls, the dolls that you want to be associated with, the smart, all of those things, all of the positive characteristics. And then the students were asked to choose those different dolls. As we could probably expect, right? The students chose the dolls that were very fair skinned and or white, and these were Black children, right? So that was in 1947. In 2011, Anderson Cooper from CNN kind of replicated that study, and we can see the same results that still happen with individuals looking at something and making a determination of what is good or bad, right? And I think that oftentimes happens in our classrooms. There was a study by Yale, and it looked at preschool teachers' eye movements. And so, um, like, I think it was like 45% of the time, preschool teachers had their eyes on Black boys in the classroom. And it's no surprise that they had their eyes, I think it was maybe 30% of the time on white boys or other boys in the classroom, which is that's another part of the conversation. And then the other portion of the time was girls. But it just shows like what is happening in the mind of individuals as they are instructing and engaging boys, but particularly Black boys, the level of attention that was being given to them just by tracking the eye movements of teachers. And we've seen other types of studies by like Heckinger report that would look at the name of a student on a test or an essay, and Jamal was getting graded much differently than Josh was. You take off the names, the grading becomes a lot more closer in terms of percentage points in the way it was evaluated. And I mean, I think we can even look at socially, right? Like just within the last 2 weeks, there was I don't remember where it was. New Jersey. It was in New Jersey. I don't know if you saw there was a fight in a mall in New Jersey between a Black boy and a white boy. Oh, Sheldon, you got to check it
And
out.
one was one arrested and the other one wasn't. I think I saw
Yes,
bits and pieces. I heard
yes,
bits and pieces of this one. Yeah.
yes. So, like, it took my breath away. It took my breath away to watch two teenage boys fight, and
Yeah.
boys fight, right? They got into a fight. When the police officers came, they were separated, and the officers immediately arrested
Yeah.
the Black boy, had him on the ground, had him pinned, handcuffed, and they just kind of had their hand on the white kid and had him sit on the couch
Yeah.
while they were still doing what they were doing with the Black boy. And I mean, anything could have happened while they had their backs turned on this kid. But then when they turned around, like he had his hands up, like, are you gonna arrest me too? Like,
Mhm.
so he was just as shocked in that moment as I was, and probably many other people who were viewing the evident bias that took place in that particular situation. And
I remember
unfortunately,
hearing about that. I actually I was in Portland this week and I was working with the Juvenile Justice Center out there, and I think the facilitator was telling me about that story, where it was just the one you had one student, the white student and the Black student, and just the differences of how they were treated.
yeah.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah. Incredibly unfortunate. So my challenge though is that was that like intentional like prejudice or in discrimination or in maybe even racism, or was it just bias, like an unconscious movement, like this is the perpetrator, this is the person
Mhm.
that we need to give our attention to as law enforcement officers. So we're always struggling with that bias, and we have to learn about that, right? Because everybody has it. It's in our
Mhm.
subconscious. It's always operating. But until you can train yourself to disrupt that, and I'm not just talking about white folks, Asian folks, Latino, I'm talking about everybody needs to be able to train themselves to disrupt that bias. And so until we do more exploration of other groups and other cultures, um, we don't learn about the nuance of different racial and cultural experiences, and we just see something as that's different as could potentially deviant, right? And we need to kind of rethink that. And I use the work of Zaretta Hammond quite often in terms of like looking at cultural archetypes as a
Mhm.
way of understanding why while your culture is normal to you and it's invisible to you, like there are other things that you can learn and see about other folks, that will begin to train yourself to disrupt that bias that we all live with.
It's and I'm glad that you say that we all have it, because we do, but I can't tell you how many teachers I've talked to, how many folks I've talked to say, "Oh, no, I treat all my kids the same. I don't have any bias." And I think that's the problem, right? It's like until we recognize that we have bias, then how can we
Yeah.
address those biases? I mean, I'll do a training on it, and I'll say, listen, I bet you can look in the room right now, look to your left, to your right. There's somebody in here that should be in here that they're not, that there's not here.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, while you're doing this work, and I appreciate what we got going on, but man, it would be really nice to have those folks that really should be in
Yeah.
this room, because our students see multiple staff throughout the day. So if
Yep.
you're the only person that's really attuned to that bias, and
Yep.
everybody else that the kid sees for that day, especially those black boys that they see for the day, you're going to end up with these same challenges. So it sounds good. What would you suggest to, if we were going to push this a little bit further? How do we get or convince other folks you got bias, or this work needs to happen, or what does bias work, I guess, look like? That's probably the question I'm trying to ask. What does bias work look like?
Hmm. So a lot of the work that I do to try and get to that point of the recognition of one's bias is
Mhm.
around the examination of one's culture. And so when people say, I don't see color, I don't, I'm colorblind,
Yeah.
like those are the folks who when we're having a conversation about culture, shallow surface and deep levels of culture, those are the individuals who are like, I don't have culture. Like, yes, you do.
You do.
You absolutely, everybody has culture, but you just need to be asked the right questions so you can kind of reflect on your socialization and how you see the world. And like, so it's really about kind of making the invisible visible. And that's what we have to aim to do, making the invisible visible. Because when we don't know ourselves, whiteness fills in the gaps, right?
Mhm.
Like everything that we think is just kind of like, oh, that's just the way it is. That no, that there's a system, there's a thinking, there's an operation around the normalcy of whiteness in our culture. And it comes under the larger umbrella of America when we're talking about, of course, patriotism and meritocracy and capitalism and all of those things. We need to examine it, and then we need to examine the culture of many other groups so we can see that there are differences that we can all appreciate.
Mm.
But until we can learn to appreciate it, we're always going to be fearful of it. We're always going to be concerned about it. We're always going to want to control it in the spaces that we are supposed to be sharing together.
I love this. All right, all right, all right. So the first step, and I don't believe in checklist, but I think these are some really good guidelines to kind of. I mean, there's you have three, but it's touching the surface, it's scratching the surface. This is not the end all. Do these three things, and your black boys are going to excel. But I think that this is part of the process of starting with getting to know about your biases. What would be the second thing that you have as a recommendation?
Okay, so let me add one last thing to learn about your
Okay.
bias. I wrote a piece for which was then teaching tolerance. Now it's
Learning for justice.
learning for justice. So, and it's called Stop Talking in Code, Call Them Black Boys, right?
Mhm.
Because there was something that just kept on coming up for me when people use the language of black males.
Mhm.
Because I think there's some socio-historical baggage that comes with that term, and it removes the personhood. I know you and I had talked about this one time before. Like, I think it removes the personhood and the humanity from boys. Like it you don't talk about them as preschoolers, as adolescents, as preteens, as teens, and all of those stages of development in between, right? We just say black males, and from there we begin to like the process of adultification and all of the negative stereotypes that can come in that exist within that word is problematic. And I think that's
Mhm.
something that everybody needs to reconsider doing in their practices, in their exploration of data. These are black boys, these are children, these are teenagers, so we expect them to do those teenage things. But when we see them as black males, we have this kind of like weird curiosity about who they are in something different, and we need to explore that more. So, um, learn about your bias and think differently. The second
Mhm.
one is leverage how boys learn and instruct differently. So what I mean by that is when I go into many spaces and I'm talking about reaching and teaching Black boys, many educators have never had any specific learning around um, the way male learners may engage education, the way female learners may engage education. And before I go any further, let me just put this out there. Like, I'm not talking about like hardwired stereotypical gender binary stuff, but I'm talking about thinking through the lens of like physical spatial learning versus versus verbal emotive learning.
Okay.
And by and large, many times you will find that your male learners are more physical spatial.
Mhm.
By and large, you will find that boys, your male learners, are their prefrontal cortex is not developed at the same rate as your female students. Um, so what do we do in education with that information? We still put our 9-year-old boys right next to our 9-year-old girls and expect them to do the same things.
Mm.
In a boy could be a year and a half to 2 years behind in terms of maturity. And so when you say, "Why can't you sit still?" There's a reason why he can't sit still. Why can't you keep your desk on this little piece of tape that I have here? There's a reason why he probably can't do that. I have an example. Like when my daughter was 9, she said she wanted to go out for her birthday, and she loves Buffalo Wild Wings, right? So that was the choice, the
Sure.
excellent dining spot, right? Exquisite dining at Buffalo Wild Wings. Um, and so we went there, and it was like 4 of her friends, and you would have thought that those 5 little girls and me, you would have thought that we were old college buddies because we're just in there just chatting it up, just having a great time. Um, Discussion, dialogue, just different topics. And these are 9-year-olds. I've never worked in an elementary school, only high school and middle school, but I went to elementary school one time, and these were probably about 9 or 10-year-old boys. I had this great presentation lined up. I had the beautiful PowerPoint. I had them seated in a semicircle. 5 minutes into the session, like I had my back turned, then I hear, "Oh, I know you're not gonna let me do." Like so all of that begins to happen, right? And so I go back to my PowerPoint. Oh, I hear something else, right? So I turn around, everybody stand up, right? And so we begin to. I threw him a piece of paper. I said, when you have the piece of paper in your hand, you have to respond to the question that's here on the PowerPoint. Then you have to throw it to somebody else. Then you have to throw it to somebody else. Then we're going to do some jumping jacks, right? Then we're going to sit down. Then we're going to listen to, like, I had to break it up and chunk it in ways in which they were able to kind of move and be distracted from just kind of sitting and looking at a screen. And that helped. That helped that day. I don't know if it would help every day. You might have to do something the next day, but it helped that particular day. And the reason why some of these things are useful to think about with some of your male learners is because the way the P, they're called P&M cells in the eyes of young people, and their eyes respond um, to movement, to speed, to direction. So if you ever want to talk to a boy and try and get something out of them, try that. Try just tossing the football back and forth. Like, think about how many, and I thought about it as I was going through a webinar one day, and I was like, I can't think of how many times I would just go outside and play catch. Right, that was just so important for me and my friend. Let's just go play catch. Um, but I think that sometimes there's an ability to, once you're moving something, you're able to kind of think and process differently if you are a young male student, where girls are more drawn to something that is more colorful, detailed, and has a particular type of texture. So again,
Mm.
talking about that verbal emotive and the physical spatial kind of learners, those are things that we need to be constantly considering. And many educators have never had any type of training in that area.
So let me ask you this, Daryl.
Mhm.
That group where you had the boys that were together and you said you had them throwing the paper around. What if I have a classroom that is mixture of girls and boys? How do I educate how do I make sure everyone is successful? Like, how
Yeah.
would you differentiate, I guess?
Yeah. So that's the beautiful thing about this. And I get a lot of my learning about or considerations about male learning styles from the work of Leonard Sachs, Michael Gurian, Jawanza Kunjufu, Cortland Lee. So anybody can look up any of those names and you kind of do some of your research on your own. But the thing is, we want to provide those same experiences for our girls.
Mhm.
That's the thing. We shouldn't be doing something, oh, that will work for my boys. No, it's about that verbal emotive piece still has to happen in the classroom, but also we have to incorporate more of the physical spatial piece. So it's kind of like moving from like the theoretical and abstract type of learning that is common in education and moving it to more kind of like tactile pieces. Um, and it's a balance. It's a balance because our girls can afford to have more learning in that area, opposed to just those things that they're already excelling in. So how do we get to didactic to experiential? That's kind of like the goal with how you want to
Right.
set up the classroom. But it's not just I'm going to do this for my boys. I'm going to do this for my girls. No,
Right.
provide those learning experiences for both and all students in your class. So I don't want to just speak to the binary in that way, but provide that learning environment for all of your students for sure.
Okay. So just have those options. I mean, this sounds like universal design for learning could be a good resource if folks aren't familiar. It's just allowing students to provide you with their knowing that they have learned the content, they've mastered the content in various ways. That could be a more of a kinesthetic type of
Mhm.
activity, or verbal, or versus a visual, and those type of things. So if you're already doing things like that, if UDL is already in your classroom, it sounds like you're on the right track. Are there any other strategies that you might could add into that as well?
Um, so like I think of how, going back to the the fact that the prefrontal cortex is not as developed um as female students are, and the fact that it needs some rest periods,
Mhm.
like because there's like these things called neural rest states. So after a 20 or 25-minute period of time, the boy's brain is just like shut off. He needs a break, right? And
That's
so
like adults too, man. And I'll give
yeah.
you 20 minutes. I
And
give
it's
you a
funny,
strong 20
it's funny,
minutes.
Shelby,
Yeah.
that you said that because my wife is like, she'll be talking to me. She's like, "Are you having a neural rest state?" And I'm like, "Nah, babe, I got you. I'm listening. I'm listening." Um, but with our male students, like if you see them like looking out the window, if you see them tapping their pencil, if you see them kind of like throw a spitball or something, it's because they're trying to reactivate their brain. And
Mhm.
so like they'll walk across the classroom, you'd be like, "Where are you going?" And be like, "Oh, I needed to throw this little, I need to throw this away." Like they're
Mhm.
trying to get up, they're trying to move, they're trying to activate their brain so you can stay engaged because it's not as easy for them to do it as it is for our female students. And I think also one last piece I would think about. Um, so there's a hormone called oxytocin, right? And it
Mhm.
like when we talk about a nurturance hormone, this is something that boys have less of than our girls do. So a lot of times, girls want to be perfectionists. Girls want to comply and want to please the teachers, where boys are less inclined to do that. A boy, like he's been yelled. He was yelled at by his mom 5 times before he walked out the house in the morning. So of course, like going to school and getting fussed at by a teacher is no big deal. So I think it's those types of things and providing like environments for like some competition, some opportunities to display one's ability, one's growth towards adulthood or to manhood, right? Because boys are always trying to figure out how to be the man, not a man per se, but trying to be the man. So I'm always thinking of what opportunities am I given for individuals to think through, and be able to kind of mirror themselves against others to see how far they've developed with a particular type of learning. So, yeah.
All right, that sounds good. So, for those who just joined us, just to recap, we're talking about imagine a school where all the black boys do well, and Dr. Howard here has three different, and again, these are not the end all, but these are three suggestions to kind of get you going in that direction. One was learning about your biases. Number two was leverage how boys learn. What's the third one?
The third one is love them like your own.
Mm.
Like, so
Say that one more time, please.
learn about your bias and think differently.
Uh-huh.
Leverage how boys learn and instruct differently, and then love them like your own and engage them differently.
There you go. Tell me more.
Like like that's the end all. Like, we could put the cap on it right now. If you love black boys like your own children,
Mm.
you never give up, right?
Mm.
Like, who gives up on their own kids, right? Who lowers expectations for their own kids? Like I said, I have three daughters. One who's a freshman in college at Spelman, one who's a sophomore, and one who's in middle school. And they can tap my nerves. I'm sure I can tap theirs. And some days we have to say, you know what, we're not hearing each other. Let's come back to this. Let's reset. Let's try this again tomorrow. How many times are we willing to give that benefit of the doubt to our students, particularly our black boys? Like, there's something sometimes that bias does to us that makes us say, you know what, you need a consequence. You don't need a reset. We don't need to restore this relationship. You need to be sent home. Like, so if we approach everything in terms of, with a posture of restoration opposed to always consequence, I think there's something in informative in that. A boy is going, send him home. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to be on Fortnite. I want to be on Roblox, whatever games for 3 days. Send me home.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be much more of a learning experience for him to have a conversation with you about why he said what he said, why I told you to shut up. Like, if a student told a teacher to shut up and didn't have to reflect on that and explain that in a conversation, like, that's the type of experiences we want students to be able to have, because those are life skills. You send him home for suspension, guess what? He's chilling. He comes back. The teacher's still holding a grudge. They never have an opportunity to reset the relationship. And
then the teacher has to try to get the student caught up because he's missed 3 days of school.
Because they missed 3 days of school, right? And that reset is a part of life. Like, I don't know if you're married, but I've been married for 20 years. Like, resetting is critical. And that's a skill that you have to learn. And sometimes you have to be a lifelong learner around that. Because if you care about that relationship and that person, you're going to be, hey, you know what? I messed up yesterday. Let's try and do this right today. Let's be better today. So I think that's part of, like, the thinking behind love them like your own. And plus, coming from, like, when we talk about learning about cultural archetypes, like, the African American community is very relational. So if they see you as an auntie opposed to, like, an administrator, like, who's out to get me, like, an auntie's posture is different than the person who's trying to consequence you. Like, an auntie can check you and be like, yo, you need to get yourself together. Yeah. Go over there and you get yourself together and then come back in here. That's different than you need to go home. So I think it's kind of like reframing what relationships look like in schoolhouses with these with our kids. And one of my fraternity brothers, he spoke at the Bond Academy a year or two ago, and he's a dean of students somewhere up in New Jersey. And he said his philosophy is like, when students see me, do they see me as a source of stress or a sigh of relief?
Mm.
And when he said that, I almost fell off my chair because I was like, yo, that is so powerful, right? A source of stress or sigh of relief. When they see you, do they know, is this person going to harass me about my hat or my hood, or they going to be like, yo, Jamal, you can't wear that hood, right? Come on over here, man. How's school going? How's your brother? How's, like, checking in, like, because of, we recognize the fact that the relationship is incredibly important. Um, for helping students to realize, hey, there are some rules you got to follow here. But the goal is, we got to get you graduated. We got to get you some skills. We got to get you onto your career path that you want to be on. And that takes a lot of work. And it's not just sit, listen, read, do. It's more than
Mm.
that.
Listen, that's that. What did you say? Am I a sigh of relief or am I a source of stress? That's
Spiraling
deep, man.
deep,
That is,
deep.
but I never thought about it that way. Never like. But that comes down to the whole relationship part, right? The kind of relationship that you have with your students, and that is something that I'm gonna definitely think about going forward. I hope some of our educators out there listening can take that to heart. Shout out to to your frat brother about that quote because I'm still processing that thought because
Yeah,
that is a deep like that when you really think about what does that mean, that's
yeah,
really important.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Shout out
like
to
I
Elmani Viney. I'll give him some name recognition on that. That's
yes,
his. That's deep.
that's
That's
powerful.
deep.
Okay, so here's the thing. I love how you ended, step number 3 or to do number 3 was, love your black boys like your own, and I think that's
Mhm.
a part that sometimes we miss, because we would do things for our own children differently probably than what we would do for our students, some of our students, and I think
Mhm.
if you have that approach, that makes the most sense. I would argue that's foundational. That should have been number 1,
Yeah.
before implicit bias is, because if you are treating your students as your own kids, that could help mitigate some of those biases that you hold. Um, but I really do love that. Are there any? Do you have a bonus that you want to add to this to the list?
So it's got to start with the L. So I don't have another L with me that I could come up with. But I
Okay.
think I think I chose those three because those are the three essential elements that should be taking place in the schoolhouse, right?
Mhm.
Like the thinking, the instruction, the engagement. Like those are the three things that are essential that every educator is trying to figure out every single
Mm,
day.
mm.
Every good educator is reflecting on those three things, or should be reflecting on those things every single day if they want to be better. So I chose to keep it compact so that folks don't get lost in
Yeah,
the 10 top steps
that's-
for, and three's
I
good.
got you. That
Three's
makes
good.
sense. All
Yeah,
right, we're
three.
so folks that are out there, if you have some questions, I'm gonna give Daryl an opportunity to say his final thoughts, and then we're gonna open up some questions. So if you have some thoughts, some questions that you would like to throw out to this live stream, go ahead and start popping those in as right now, so that we can have those ready to go. But Daryl, I consider you as a voice of leading equity, and it's always good to connect with you and chop it up. And I thoroughly have enjoyed. I mean, you brought the church today, and so I appreciate the work that you're doing. What are your takeaway thoughts?
Um, so the work is constant. The work towards critical consciousness is just constant, and you can go down so many different rabbit holes, and so sometimes you got to kind of step back a little bit
Mhm.
and take care of yourself, because there's so many things that you will begin to see and to recognize that you feel need attention. particularly around like marginalization and injustice, and you'll see things that you haven't seen um, before. And folks sometimes get overwhelmed with that, and I'm like, stop. First thing you do is you worry about your classroom.
Mm.
That's your responsibility, your classroom. Anything that happens outside of that is just a bonus, right? So if you start a book study in your school, or you lead a committee, or you do professional development for folks, or like you you can grow and you can share in other ways, but your first priority, so that you don't get overwhelmed, your first priority are those students that are sitting in front of you every single day. And when they
Mm.
walk across the threshold of your classroom door, how do they feel? Do you know their name? Like, there's something about hearing your name, right? Even with my college classes in virtual spaces, every response when we do discussion boards, I say their name first, because I want them to know I didn't copy and paste this. Like, I said your
Yeah.
name. Sheldon, that was a great idea that you just expressed. I want you to know I'm speaking specifically to you. What do they see on the walls of your classroom? How are your chairs set up for dialogue? How are you giving students different ways of assessment, so that they can demonstrate what they know? Not everybody's going to be good on the multiple choice. Not everybody's going to be good on the essay. Not everybody's going to be good on the oral presentation. But mixing it up so that everybody has an opportunity to be great. How are you expanding the curriculum? That's key. That
Mm.
that's key in this day and time, to be able to. History is more than one person's story,
Yeah.
and we need to be able to hear multiple perspectives and multiple stories about the society that we live in. If we want to improve upon it, we need to know about it, and what can we learn, and how can we think through what can make us better. So, a number of different things to consider about your particular classroom. That's another conversation, but that's where it starts. Critical consciousness on your own, but the action is in your classroom.
Mm. All right, this guy right here. I tell you what, and listen, you always bring in some great insights. Are there any questions? If there are, just pop them in. I don't see any right now, so we'll give it another minute or so to see if there's any questions that pop up. Um, if we got folks that want to reach out to you on social, what's the best way to connect, and how can they get a hold of your book as well?
Yeah, so everything is at Daryl Howard PhD. Um, I'll drop it in the chat too, at Daryl Howard PhD. But I also just take a quick moment to note, like, the work that I do. I mentioned MSDE, the work that I do in my school system, but also do a lot of good work with the Bond Project.
Yeah, talk about it.
Bond, yeah, bondeducators.org. Our focus is on recruitment and retention of male educators of color. I'm sure across the country, 2% is the average,
Mhm.
and we need to think through how to provide um, education with our voices, so that our students, our young men, can get those types of experiences and observations more a lot easier than they currently do. And yeah, so we host a Bond Academy every year. It's on the website bondacademy.org. Please, excuse me, bondeducators.org, and you'll find information on the Bond Academy. And it's conference led by all Black, Latino, and male educators of color. So, interesting space, because most schools, if I were to ask folks how many Black or Latino male educators have you had in your life, most folks would say two, three. This is an entire day, an entire conference that features the voices of Black and brown educators.
I put the link in the chat there so folks can grab that if they want to participate in this. We got a question from Henry Gilmore. The question is, what advice will you give for helping Black boys develop a love for reading?
So, Henry, that's a great question, and I wish you would have asked me that maybe 2.5, 3 weeks ago. So with the work that I'm doing with the state, we have a speaker series every month, and we had Dr. Alfred Tatum. If you're not
Mm.
familiar with his work, please go check him out. His work is all around Black boys and literacy and developing kind of like textual lineages that puts them in spaces that they haven't been in before. And he did a presentation that would knock your socks off for us for our February speaker series. So please check out the work of Alfred Tatum if you're interested in thinking about how to develop a love for reading with Black boys.
All right. Let's see if there's any more. Is there one more question? If not, let's give it another minute or so. But make sure that you check out and support Bond leadership, Bond educators, the Bond project. Make sure you support, peruse through the website. There's a lot of valuable information there. And if you work with Black boys in your school setting and your community, definitely is a resource for you. So feel free to look through that website and see if you can connect as well. Did you
Yeah.
share already, Daryl, where folks can find your book?
You can do Amazon, you can do Barnes and Noble, you can find it most anywhere.
Remind me the
Complex
title.
complex people. Complex people, insights at the intersection of Black culture and American social life.
There we go. All
Yeah,
right. Well, we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you, Tony, for your comments. Tony enjoyed the session, and I thoroughly have enjoyed the session as well. This again, you always enlighten me, so I always appreciate the time. And so thank you so much for joining us.
yeah, great time. I always like hanging out with you, man. So keep it going, man. You're doing great work. You're doing great work. So keep it up.
I'm trying to be like you when I grow up, man.
Hey man, look, just so to everybody who's in the chat, thanks for coming, thanks for tuning in. Definitely reach out to me if I can ever support the work that you're doing. Um, every day we can be better. So that's the motto that I want you to take away with it. So have a great evening, everybody. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Good night.